Hello, welcome all.
Hi guys,
What's up?
chilling. How
Just
are
hanging
you?
out, hanging out.
About to talk about things.
Your wonderful mustard background.
Yes, your beautiful blue background.
Very blue, matches my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome to all our on live listeners for our first of 6 vulnerable conversations between a woman, that would be Arielle, and a man, that would be me, about a variety of topics that we'll be chatting about. And just, I thought we'd start off with why we're doing this. It's always starts with why. My good friend Simon Sinek always recommends you start with why. And so what's your why? Why are you doing this, Arielle?
I'm doing this, number one, because this has basically been the drive behind the coaching work and the group facilitation work that I do, that how do me as a woman and you as a man and the collective women and collective men actually find a way to communicate where we both can feel safe being vulnerable, safe being open about our desires and our fears and our insecurities, and look at each other as brothers and sisters primarily before we get into, am I going to have sex with you? And especially everything that's arisen along the lines of the Me Too movement, which, I think we proposed this idea a few weeks beforehand. It just feels relevant now more than ever around how can we as women and men have conscious, open, connected dialogues about sexuality and connection.
I'm in total agreement. I think I'm doing this because I dig you, and I think you're cool.
Thank you for your vulnerability.
Yeah, I do. And it's just really always enjoyment. We have a certain je ne sais quoi when we get on the line together chatting about things. And I do think the combination of our two vulnerabilities, our expertise, and our dialogue hopefully will help. And I think that's my mission in life. I have a very strong mission in life, and that's to wake the world the fuck up, and also to add how people can relate better, because from my view and my research, it's kind of nasty out there in terms between the genders, and I think it's getting worse. And so hopefully we can turn the corner and have people relate better.
Yeah, and feel turned on in the process like I do right now.
Oh, good. That's a good thing. Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
Totally.
Yeah. So really, it's just about taking these 6 topics, talking about them until they're done. We slotted 60 minutes for this, and it might take 20 minutes or 30 minutes, though we're both kind of chatty Cathys, so I suspect it'll last a little bit longer. And anyone on the live studio audience, if you'd like to chat a question or even come on the line, we'd invite that towards the second half of the show. And let's just have 6 vulnerable, dialogues and conversations about these topics. And the first topic is about, oh my goodness, there's Esty. That's my stepdaughter. Hi. Boundaries. The first topic is boundary, content, and power dynamics. 3 big things that are going on right about now. So that's the topic of today's show. We'll wax the poetic for 60 minutes and then see what wants to arise. So before that, for people who are watching this video for the first time, maybe don't know who we are, why we should be doing, why don't you give a little synopsis of who you are in the world, Arielle, and maybe tie in some of these topics so they get a feel for you.
Totally. So my name's Arielle Brown, and I'm a relationship coach. I'm an intimacy educator and group facilitator, all with the common thread of how do we show up as authentically embodied in the truth of who we are and lead from that place in every moment. And, what really brought me into this work was actually my relationship with food and my body. I always knew that I was interested in psychology and understanding why people do what they do when they do it. And amidst being in college, I had this really intense hatred of my body and was afraid that no one was ever going to love me because I had 15 extra pounds of weight on my body. And it really gripped me for most of my young adult life until I wound up moving out to California and going to culinary school and deciding I'm just going to type food psychology into Google and see what happens. And I wound up finding the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, where I got certified as an eating psychology coach and really started to look at my relationship to nourishing my body and my relationship to pleasure and just feeling good about the things that I put into my body, which very interestingly, yet not so surprisingly, led me to my relationship with sexuality, my relationship to men, and how I invited men and sexual energy into my body, and figuring out, like, what do I actually want when I'm not constantly trying to please someone else, or checking in with, oh, like, is this man that I'm having sex with enjoying himself? Does he want to be my boyfriend? Is he in love with me? And I wound up finding my way into this practice called orgasmic meditation, which, brief snippet, is a practice that involves 15 minutes of clitoral stroking of a woman with no goal other than to just feel what wants to come up.
Mhm.
And what I realized is that, for most of my sexual experiences, I was always so focused on what the other person wanted, what the other person needed, that I wasn't really familiar with what a yes or no in my body felt like. So I didn't actually know what my desires are, and I was kind of terrified of saying no to things because I felt that mean that I'd lose the person that I loved. So this practice really got me into my body and really connected to my desires and my boundaries, and realizing that this is kind of the basis for how we need to engage in relationship that's actually authentic and genuine and nourishing. So it's just kind of been my passion and my mission to, like, support people in creating relationships that are really based on who they are and what they want versus who we feel like we need to be or should be. And it's been a magical journey.
So let me ask you a follow-up question. So
Yeah.
I hear in your story that you didn't know much about your boundaries before the work. In other words, there wasn't a conscious way you were thinking, I want this food in my body, or I want this person's genitals in my body. And so, how would you describe your relationship to the concept of boundaries in the last, 10 years of your journey?
Oh my goodness. The last 10 years of my journey, I was just terrified of saying no because I was terrified of losing love.
Hmm.
And I feel like that pretty much sums up the majority of why people don't assert boundaries, because we're afraid that the no means that people are going to leave, or people are not going to be there anymore, or we're going to be made wrong. So what I would say is boundaries will continue to be a process for me because my boundaries continue to evolve. But what I've learned about myself is that the more approval that the more I value myself, and the more I realize that I'm actually a fucking amazing woman and I can actually trust my intuition. And if something doesn't feel good, it's probably actually because it's not good for me right now.
Hmm.
And that I don't need to have a logical, rational explanation as to why. Simply the fact that I'm feeling a no in my body is enough. And I can just say that. And that there's nothing actually wrong with that. And that my ideal is that I attract people into my life and have relationships in my life where people really want me to say no and want me to respect my boundaries. So a big thing has been letting go of relationships in my life where people have made me feel bad for what I feel or what I believe or
Hmm.
what I want. That's been huge.
And that's a boundary in itself.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. My name is Robert Kandell. I've been on this journey 19 years. I started on March 20th, 1999, with a realization of really how little I knew. And it was one of the hardest moments of my life, being totally embarrassed, but also one of the most important, because it was like, oh, I am clueless around my effect on other people. I am clueless around how I invade boundaries, or how my words or my actions. And I wasn't a bad person. I was actually a pretty nice guy, But in that class, in that moment, I saw how much I needed to learn and how much I wanted to grow. And to me, my boundaries were very well defined in a mathematical, linear, analytical way. Like everything had a plan and a structure attached to it. And so all my boundaries were set up for me to, do what I wanted to do in the world, but I didn't really think about the effect it had on other people. And so this journey for 19 years has taught me about my impact and how I can be in the world and who I can touch on many different levels and how to do it deliberately. So it's been a fascinating ride.
Mm. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course. This is a dialogue between a man and a woman. You being the
Awesome.
woman, me being the man.
I was just asking for consent.
Oh,
Um,
that's the second topic. That's good.
um, so I'm really curious about what you've learned about your impact upon women. That you're saying you didn't necessarily realize your impact on women, and in the conversation of boundaries, I'm curious what one of like the greatest aha moments was for you around your impact upon women based upon your actions or your energetic expression that you didn't initially realize.
Well, I'll go back to that moment, March 20th, 1999. Was in a class, and I was married at the time, and Carol was sitting right next to me, and I was doing my introduction, and I was speaking so unaware of my impact. And so I was speaking and speaking, and I thought I nailed this introduction. Everyone's going to love me. The teacher was like, come up and teach with us. And the people would do the wave and people would clap. And instead, the teacher said, hey, do you know your wife's crying? And she was sitting right next to me, maybe a foot and a half away. And I've told the story so many times, but it was such a huge moment because there were two parts of this. One is I had no idea about the impact I had on the woman I cared most at the time, my best friend. But she had never felt free enough to say, Rob, your words are misogynistic and cruel and they hurt my feelings. She never felt the permission to actually authentically relate how my words impacted. And so we had a bravado, misogynistic blowhard on me on some level, nice guy, but a blowhard, and then a mute woman. And the combination led to this way that I was jabbing her and she never told me and I never learned. And so I got in that moment, both sides of the importance of it. And so my mission has been there is really comes down to for men to listen and women to talk, because without that, this level of impact that men have on women is unseen and not known, and the cycle continues.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's it's a very interesting balance. Like I'll share my experiences with different men.
Okay.
I have had men in my life who like every step of the way will just like check in on me. Like, are you still a yes to this? Like, does this feel good? How does this feel? Like, are you a yes? In ways that feel genuinely good and genuinely nourishing and invite me to really feel the space to just be like, oh, like, am I a yes in this moment? And then I've had other men in my life where it's like they're not by in no means actively violating my boundaries, but there's not that check-in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this interesting thing of the beauty of what you're saying, like men really listening so that women can have the space to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to like why that's necessary for extra space to be created for women as opposed to the standpoint of oh well, women just need to speak up?
Well, let's complicate this
Awesome.
more.
Let's do it.
Because if you ask a woman too many times, the perception, I'll just say the men's perception, if I can speak for the man, is that she's going to get annoyed and turned off and I'm going to ruin the mood. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And then so men don't do it because we think like we're supposed to know. We're supposed to be able to know when to take her shirt off and when to put our fingers into her genitals. We're supposed to know these things. And so if I ask, then she's going to think I'm a wimp, and the mental gyrations of a man, takes our attention off the woman and onto this internal dialogue. And so that's the complicated thing. And then women, I know, will say, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or what if he leaves if I'm too much of a nudge, or will he think I'm a bitch because, I'm asking for too much. And so it's this both genders are having this vastly complicated internal dialogue and not even paying attention to each other because you're stuck in the internal dialogue. I think that's the core issue beyond the asking of consent. Not that it's important, but I think that's the first thing to talk about.
Well, yeah, I guess the question comes up for me is, how do we actually make boundaries and consent sexy? Like, how can this be something where it doesn't have to be this thing that we're like,
yeah,
but instead creating a space where we can see how the boundaries and the consent conversation can actually be something that generates turn on.
Wait, I have to confuse it more. So then there's the rape culture. This and the Harvey Weinstein is blown up. Thank God he's blown up this. But then men are, you see on this, it was me conversations, men are questioning, when I touched her shoulder without permission, was I a rapist? The extremities of it all. And men are so afraid to break those boundaries, which is getting more and more complicated. And so it is a mess out there. So I don't know, I just kind of derailed the conversation. But it's important. It's important to know because this is a big piece of the puzzle.
Well, and it's a complicated part of the question because amidst the Me Too, and I've spoken about this before, I fear, my concern for the Me Too movement is that it runs the potential of actually having women identify even more with victimhood. And I think it is so important for us as women to look at the places where we're still attached to playing the victim. Because when we're attached to that place, it's very easy to victimize and villainize men. And that's one of the challenges that I see with the conscious spirituality movement, is that so many women, like we're empowered and we're independent and we're conscious, but there's this underlying fear of not feeling empowered and feeling like a victim, which I find can make it very easy for us to castrate or make it very difficult for men to not do everything perfect.
I think, another aside to derail this conversation anymore, I think it's one of men's greatest fears. I think it's one of my biggest fears to be falsely accused of being a perpetrator or violator or worse, a rapist. And I think my entire life, even though I describe myself as a misogynistic blowhard at some points in my life, especially when I was nervous, on the flip side was I was really scared to death to be that guy. So I didn't even approach women. Like I was like, women are like, you're an idiot. I'm like, why? Because I've been flirting with you for an hour. I'm like, you were? It's just like, so it's like, men have that fear as well. It's like, we don't want to be known as a perpetrator. We don't want to be that guy. And so we don't even know what to trust anymore. Because you can't trust women because they'll say one thing and then all of a sudden they'll say something different. And they can't trust ourselves because we don't really know what the boundaries are. So it's this challenging place we're in.
Yeah, it's a challenging place because it's like we want to acknowledge as women that we're conscious and spiritual, and we also want to get fucked.
Okay.
And that's not the only thing. Like I know, like I just as much desire deeply emotional, sensitive, attuned connection, and that can also take the form of fucking.
Right.
And we live in a culture that's really kind of stigmatized women for desiring that type of intimacy, which can really kind of like screw us up around our desires.
Yep. I saw a post today referencing Young Frankenstein. Did you see that movie as a kid?
I did not.
Oh my
I've
goodness.
heard about it though.
Now I know there's some issues here. We have to work on this. We have to get you Young Frankenstein. Anyway, there's a scene where Frankenstein basically takes advantage of Lady Frankenstein or whatever. But the next scene after the scene, she's in the bed smoking with this very enjoyable look on her face. Like, just that, like, oh, thank God he took advantage of me. And then there's Han Solo. There's Han Solo in the Millennium Falcon when he bypasses Princess Leia's. Do you know this scene at all?
Oh, I know. Tell me it. I'm probably.
All right. I know. I'm sorry. I'm geeking out. It'll make sense
You
in a second.
geek out. I love it.
So then there's a scene in the Millennium Falcon, the first time like Harrison Ford and Han Solo and Princess Leia are flirting, and like he totally like bypasses all her no's and her consent and makes a move on her. And so I read this article a long time ago that was like, this was the introduction to rape culture. My hero Han Solo didn't take Leia's no. And he's an icon. He's a huge icon for especially of kids of the 70s and 80s.
But you know what? The problem is, and this is where it makes it even more complicated for you guys, is that, and I might get yelled at for this, and this is not the generalization, it's just so many, like I don't know if I should, I'll speak for myself.
All right,
I'll speak for myself.
Okay.
So I desire to surrender and let go of control, or this illusion of control in so many aspects of my life. And I know for men, like my current partner, like him, just me letting him take control, like you could just like hold it, like terrifying.
Yeah.
And it has been the moments where I have gone against what I thought was better judgment, but was actually just a surface layer of fear, that I've had some of the most profound and like deeply like delicious experiences I ever could have imagined. But it required me to let go of a no that was actually just like an attachment to trying to control things and keep things safe. And that's a very complicated place, because it's talking about playing with boundaries. Like it's playing with like realizing that we're sovereign beings, and that hopefully we get to a place where we can choose whether or not we allow ourselves to be traumatized, which is another challenging spot of taking sovereignty for the fact that trauma doesn't need to occur, but it can very easily. But it tends to be in those places where we lean into our no's and explore what's behind the no, that there actually can be some of the most beautiful experiences of liberation. And that's a very chargy, I mean, that's why so many women have the secret like submission. That's why 50 Shades of Grey was as popular as it was, because it's a hidden desire so deeply.
Right. And 50 Shades of Grey pisses off the BDSM community to no end, because it messes with all their traditions 100%. Yeah. Okay, so let's focus on this for a second. Okay, so we're going to use you as a guinea pig. So you had an experience where you were a no, and your partner, David, correct?
Yes.
David, who will be watching later, maybe.
No, he will.
You talked about me. So can you describe, was it a physical experience? Was it a mental experience? Can you explain how you got through your no and what you learned from it?
Oh my goodness. This actually wasn't a sexual experience.
Great.
This is so awesome. So he and I were camping with a few of his friends from the Burning Man community, and we had may or may not have partaken in some hallucinogens the night before.
Okay.
And there was this moment where I had plans to go home and like meet up with a girlfriend to make music, but his friend, his kind of crazy, wily friend, wanted to go snowboarding down sand dunes, like these huge sand dunes. And my only experience of snowboarding was like more experience on my ass than like standing up. And this guy was just kind of like a little crazy and like the best of ways. And I was just like burning in this ambivalence of like, there were two different decisions that I could make. One was safe and predictable, and one was trusting like this experience that David was facilitating that I had no way of predicting, and trusting that I would be okay. And that, like, I was just burning in it. And like, there was all kind of this chaos going on around us. And he was like, you know that you're creating ambiguity for everyone right now, just stewing in this situation. And like, I just decided to do it. Like, and I literally felt this desire to cry, like, just like I don't know why, but it was like this experience that I had no previous like reference to, like trusting that I would be safe. And there was something like, it was like something was dying in me from just like surrendering control of not knowing what to expect. And I wound up just having such a fucking amazing time,
Mm.
and like coming back and feeling so empowered and just so turned on and so happy. And it was a powerful experience for me.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, that's a great example and it's a horrible example.
Okay.
Because you broke your own boundary. David, from that story that you referred, noticed you, recognized you, saw you, reflected back to you, and just said, you're creating this ambiguity. He didn't tell you, get your ass on that bus, bitch, and surf that mighty sand. He just said, this is what I noticed. That is a powerful friend. That is a powerful experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you mean I broke my own boundary, though?
Well, you had ambiguity. Like, should I go home and do my status quo, or should I do this crazy thing with this crazy guy that usually I end up on my ass about? And so you were sitting in the ambiguity. This is my view of it. I could be wrong.
No, I appreciate.
But then you were boundary. You were playing with your own boundaries. Should I stay or should I go now? Like, you're playing the Clash in your head. You're going back and forth. And then all he did was notice you, really positively, powerfully notice you. And then you decided, it sounds like you decided to break your own boundary and go on the
Yeah.
ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say this
Okay.
is taking this into a different space, though.
Yeah.
It's a very important place I think, for women to look.
Hit it.
As there's a lot of conversation around the places where women have been violated by men.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if we're conscious women committed to our growth work and we're actively engaging in this path of personal growth, I prescribe to the belief that we constantly attract into our life experiences that reflect what is going on within us.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had some interesting experiences of violation over the past 3 months, and beneath my acknowledgement of being violated by a man, I have been looking at the places where, okay, where did I actually violate myself? Because I allowed myself to be violated. Where have I abandoned myself? Like throughout most of my life, and have been perpetuating the energy of violation because I haven't been in touch with and connected to my own boundaries. And I feel like, especially if we are women who desire to engage in our power with powerful men and have these like amazing experiences, we need to take a responsibility for looking at where we're not just advocating for ourselves and simply saying no.
I think that's awesome. I mean, Morgan and I have a lot of conversations. Morgan is my partner and my muse, and we have a lot of conversations to that point. And she really teaches me a lot about law of attraction, in not so much the fashionable law of attraction, but how we do magnetize, and we're a match for that. And it's sort of like, if you want to grow this part of ourselves, you call in these experiences so you could learn and just really notice these things about yourself. So I'm in total agreement about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, how do we remove shame from the equation? Like, imagine how our personal growth and healing wounds would change if we just removed feeling shame about our choices and our experiences from the
What
picture.
fun would that be? Come on, you need a little shame to add a little entertainment to the movie. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh goodness.
Go
Goodness.
ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, because like ultimately there is no right or wrong. It's just that there's no like bad or good experiences, except we would probably prefer to not be violated. But shame does add a very interesting fuel to the fire, because when we get on the other side of it, it's just like, whoa.
Okay, so let's come back from that realm of responsibility, which I love, and let's bring it back down to some more pragmatic things, because that's some advanced shit, man. When you're saying, you're violating yourself first. But let's bring it back down to some practical things around consent and how do we do it? We've made a mess in the first 30 minutes of all these different challenges we're facing and things we're seeing. And, how do we relate, and how do we have fun, and how do we get well fucked, and how do we learn to have boundaries that we can educate people to know, to honor, to listen to, and then also play with when that's appropriate.
Totally. Well, one comes to mind that I really love, and this
Okay.
is from a lover of mine, um, where like I like to play with power dynamics. I
Okay.
like to play with being restrained. I like to not know everything that's going to happen to me before it happens. And one of the things he conveyed to me specifically around consent was that, okay, so are we going to make the agreement that everything is a yes until you say no?
Mm.
So for me, that feels great because one, I have a lot of trust with this person and know that my no, like he's turned on by my no.
Mm.
And we're also creating a container where the assumption is I am a yes until I say no, which gives a man permission to like act on his desire because he knows that the woman is empowered to say no at any time. So it's like, how can we actually create containers in our relationships where um, we discuss what consent looks like before we engage in like the uncontrollable involuntary act of passion?
I love that. I mean, that is that's a very core teaching of mine is talk about your sex life when you're not having sex. Talk about your romantic life, talk about your communication life, create a plan, create communication bridges, create a way for you guys to relate, because in the heat of the moment, you don't want to be strategizing how to land a plane when the plane is crashing. Like, you want strategies ahead of time to know what are your procedures when things grow amiss. And what you're referring to is something I loved. And I didn't really know about much about BDSM before my one taste experience. I learned a lot, but I love the concept of safe words. And
Mhm.
safe words really do make it safe. And safe words are words ahead of the time. Basically, the defaults are red, yellow, green. Green meaning go, where everything is great. Yellow means can you slow down just a little bit? I'm hitting a boundary. And red means stop right now.
Mhm.
So it sounds like you had some good safe words in your experience.
Mhm.
No being the safe word.
Yep. I have
Yeah.
a question. I have a question for you.
All right, hit me.
So we have a lot of there's a lot of conversation about men asking consent for women. That tends to be the norm. So
Yeah.
I'm curious for you. Where do you feel that you've been violated by women, and like where do you wish women would embrace consent more, or kind of like checking in dynamics with you?
Well, that's a charged question. Thank you very much, Arielle,
You're
for that
welcome.
lovely discharged question. Well, I've had different phases of my life. And so, the first 28 years, I was pride and true vanilla yuppie. So I don't think had any violations because I didn't put myself in any situations. Like I said, I was very aware of my boundaries, and I put myself in very protective ways. Now, my dad, violated on some level, an energetic level, because he pushed his agenda onto me.
Mm,
And that balance, parents want to give and love, and yet there's that, so my earliest violations were me saying yes to my dad and to my mom with things I didn't want to do up to when I was 28. It wasn't like I was a 5-year-old, it was like 28 and saying no. So that was my first experience, was really in terms of not saying true to my parents.
mm,
When I was a restaurant server in Philadelphia, the ripe age of 23 or 24, I worked in a restaurant with a heavy population of gay servers, and they loved to torture me because I was, a straight, unexperienced white boy with so much desire and so disconnected from it. They would just torture me. They
mm,
would flirt with me, they would touch me, they would fondle me, and I'd be like, I kind of like this, but I don't really like this, but I like, and so, there was no permission there. They just knew they could torture me, so they did.
mm,
And then the peak of that was one party, this guy stuck his tongue down my throat. And I was, and I had never had that experience before of someone bypassing my boundaries. And
mm,
it's funny, I totally forgot about it until this Me Too thing. Like, I totally forgot this experience.
mm,
Okay, so back to women. So when I was running One Taste, and I did that, on some level from 29 or 30 until I was 44. So it's a 14-year experience. The main thing, to go back to your point, was I didn't have my own boundaries. I said yes to whatever I thought was important for me to say yes to. One, to look good, and two, to protect my ego and my reputation, and three, because I didn't want to get in trouble.
Mm.
And so I was emotionally and energetically abused constantly in so many experiences by many women because I didn't offer any boundaries. I would say yes, where I would meant no. And so one of the biggest ones I realized in the after effect was you mentioned ohming. I've done over 11,000 ohms in my career, 11,000 ohms.
Wow.
I think I wanted to do about 1,000 of them, maybe 1,500, maybe 1,750, but it didn't top two, and I energetically did it really to avoid punishment. Not, like the practice was good for me, but I wasn't a solid yes to it. I was doing it to get along. And I think that's one of the biggest abuses. And I can't blame anyone for that. I can't blame anyone. That was my own choice. But in therapy and plant medicine, I'm discovering the depth of how I invalidated myself by not saying no.
Thank you. And it's interesting for the men out there who have this story that if they just say yes to women, that like that's the secret answer. And what I've actually found, like it's not that. The surest way to feel disrespected and walked all over by a woman is to just not assert your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just having a conversation with David last night. We were getting into like, I would say an argument, actually. We're getting into an argument.
We call them heated discussions.
Heated discussion.
Yeah.
And like I do this thing where he'll try to like explain what he's saying. I'll just be like, no, that's not true. And that's not what's happening. And I'll just like, just like, let me talk. And like, it was uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, like, thank fucking God, because even though I was like uncomfortable, simultaneously my pussy got a little bit wet from it, because it's just like, oh, like, thank you for letting me know that like I can't just handle the fuck out of you like I try to do with the rest of my life. Like that's actually what I want to do less. Despite what powerful, conscious, spiritual women come off as, we actually really want to be handled. We just put up a lot of conscious and unconscious tests to actually see if we can trust a man enough to like surrender to him.
Well, I made the decision when I started dating Morgan 2.5 years ago. I just decided I wasn't going to lie to her. I just made the decision, like, because I've been lying to women my entire life, and lying by withholding, lying by trying to manipulate, lying by trying to avoid punishment. I've been lying. And I just thought, like, what would happen if I just based this whole relationship on being the truth? Now, sometimes the truth changes. Sometimes, I'll say one thing and then through dialogue, we'll change it to another. So it's not like it's a static truth, but it's, in the moment, this is what's true for me. And I've asked her to do the same for me. And for the most part, for both of us, it's really been powerful because I can trust her truth and she can trust mine. And one of the things I found is that women like a yes in a man, but an authentic yes. And if the answer is no, it's not a no forever. It's a no right now. Or it's a no, and it might be a yes if we change this. Or it's a no, and this is why. It's like you letting her into my world of why the no is. Then she's like, oh, that makes sense. Because when I say no, just a no to a woman or no to Morgan, and she doesn't understand the motivation, then she feels rejected. And women do not like rejection, I've noticed, at all.
No.
Men don't like rejection, but we're much better at it. Women do not like the rejection.
No, because we think it means that we're being abandoned.
Right.
We don't like that feeling.
Yeah, I know.
No, we don't.
I get it. So the answer is no, and it's usually a no and it could be something from financial to emotional, but that truth, that's like, it's so amazing. And that's where the best relating comes from. Because then she knows what my boundaries are. Rather than some passive aggressive yes and then a whine. Because Morgan and I got into a heated discussion last week, and I was a yes to her request. And it wasn't a full yes. And she called me out on it every time. She's like, how do you think that would feel if I felt that way? And I'd be like, it would suck. And she's like, what do you think it feels like? It sucks. And so we kept talking and talking. And it was a beautiful 3-hour days of hell. It was not hell per se.
3-hour days. Wow.
No, it was 24, 3 days of heated discussions in hell, basically. Yeah. But anyway, we got through it. So it's good.
Mm.
Okay. So let's consent. So how do we do this? How do we do this where everyone feels like they're themselves? So, what's your parameters of a sexy, acceptable way for your partner or future partners or friends or colleagues to create a consent package with you?
To create a consent package with me.
Yeah,
I
you
feel,
did it with the being
yeah,
tied up stuff.
in all honesty, I feel like it starts with talking about our desires.
Okay.
Which why don't we lead with pleasure? Because if we're going to have these really uncomfortable conversations around boundaries and consent, there's got to be something really powerful, there's got to be some intrinsic value there to have us lean in.
Okay.
So my feelings are speak about the things that you really want and how to create circumstances where you can actually surrender into fully receiving them.
Mm.
That's what I would say.
What if you don't know what your desires are? What if there's a guy and there's a certain je ne sais quoi, but you don't know what the quoi is?
I give myself permission to go slow.
Hmm.
And for me, when I'm feeling overwhelmed or like things are moving too fast, I'll slow things down and I'll just make eye contact with the person. So often what I feel is necessary is everyone gets heated up in the moment. And I think a big thing is just if I'm truly synced up with another person's energy,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm really connected to a person and feeling them, I'm way less to violate their boundaries than if I'm just kind of caught up in the heat of my own moment or up in my head. So it's a tricky game because it requires me to really stay present and connected to myself and to not just breeze over my own boundaries, because that's where it can get really murky, because no man wants to hear hey, that thing that we did that I was pretending I was a yes to, I was actually a no and I feel violated.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, that's I don't want to do that to a man. And it requires a lot of courage on my part and on the part of women, because we live in a culture that hasn't really valued our boundaries, especially when the answer to why is, I don't know, I just feel this way.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say for our studio audience, if you have a question, it feels like we're coming on the time where you have the opportunity to write your question in the chat or come on the line and we'll take your question. So either way. So if you're interested in doing that, please type your question into the chat or say, I'd like to come on the line to come on live. You will be recorded. So just so you know. Okay. So I was thinking when you're talking, the greatest skill that I've learned over these 18 years of self-development is to listen. And listening is not often the words. It's actually more often than not the non-words, the non-verbal communication, the subtle clues, the subtle cues of relating to a woman. And that's a skill set I think most men need to develop if they really want to play with consent, boundaries, and power dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in order to play with that's the thing. We know our friend Ken Blackman, the thing that he talks about over and over again is most of the time women need to train men. Mm-hmm. Because every woman is different. Every woman is built differently. And it requires, again, a sovereignty and a willingness in women to take the lead. Be willing to kind of lead a man through these things, when again we live in a culture where we're kind of trained that men are supposed to take the lead. Mm-hmm. So there's there's an interesting calling to the plate so to speak, that both men and women have right now, so that we can actually play full out in this like magical and delicious game of relating.
True. And I think what the Harvey Weinstein epidemic social change is showing, and I don't know if you know this, but it's showing up in so many places. There's so many more revealing of sexual harassment, from Olympic gold, gymnasts to Sacramento, California. I mean, it's just showing up everywhere. It's wonderful. Not It's not wonderful it's happened. It's wonderful it's
It's
being revealed.
powerful.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
powerful. But it really, what it is men just stop listening. A woman would say overtly no or subtly no, and a man would say wouldn't listen.
Mm.
Yeah. You got a question. Mark said, why are men on the hook for being the ones willing to dive into the breach? Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more. So why do you think men are on the hook to be the ones willing I'll challenge this question. How about that? I think men are the more overt ones diving into the breach, but women's are the more covert ones diving into the breach. What do you think?
Can you define the diving into the breach?
You don't know the Shakespeare quote?
No.
Oh, sorry. It's basically, these four soldiers. I forget which play. I think it's King Lear. Four soldiers are about to go into battle one last time, and once more into the breach, dear friends, once more. And so it's just diving back into battle
Mm.
together.
Mm.
And so men have this assumption in society, they're the ones who need to speak or ask consent, or be the one to take the risk. Why do you think society tells us that men have to do that?
Well, my honest response is that I don't think that that's the case, or at least that's not the perspective that I'm taking, Mark. Like, I consider myself to be diving into the breaches, so to speak, in my own way, and desiring to support women and doing the same. I think on the surface, it's easier to make it seem that men have more, like, men have been in power on a visible, tangible level more so than women have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's different wounding that each of us need to work with. For men, it's working more with the perpetrator, and for women, it's working more with the victim. And I find that the perpetrator is learning more how to be in command of how they penetrate reality, or like being able to learn how to control it, or being like containment of it. And for women, we're learning how to be more penetrative with our words. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I like that. I think it's, I'm thinking a lot about my relationships with women as, when I was numb and dumb, women were really leading. They were the ones with the flirtation and the eyes and the straight conversations. And I was chicken shit. I was scared to death of women. And so, like, they were actually leading, but it's much more subtle. I mean, it's just like men are big dogs with big tongues and big paws. We just, like, our tongues and paws are everywhere. And so I think women are like cats, with their tails wagging slightly and looking aloof. But the point is like, there's a way where, I think it's just been more covert. And now in today's society, it feels like women are feeling more empowered to speak directly and boldly and honestly, which will hopefully have them feel more comfortable diving into the breach.
The other piece that I want to speak to, Mark, which I have compassion, is we can't, I believe it's impossible to skip straight from victimhood to empowerment without expressing our pain and being witnessed. There's an important healing step. Like, a teacher of mine, she holds grief rituals because she says that the grieving process cannot complete until we're witnessed in our grief. So I do wish that the sharing of women's pain was done in a way that wasn't so energetically directed at hurting men. That's the biggest thing that I hold the most sadness around, how the wounding is being expressed by women. But it is important for anyone to express the emotions associated with trauma, I think, in order to transmute it and be in their power.
It's good, buddy. Give me a thumbs up. Cool. All right. Feels like we're coming to an end, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Is there anyone who has any last minute, any things they want to say before we wrap up tonight?
Any cues? All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what did we learn? I feel like I made a big mess, but I feel hopefully we got some good messiness discussion going on.
Well, you know what, Rob? I feel like more important than trying to be profound in our exclamations is just creating a space where you can have permission to sound silly or like say things that like might not be politically correct.
But I'm
And
so masculine. I like the closed containers, and I like the I's dotted and T's crossed, and the checkbox checked, and the, all the vitamins in the right order. Like I like my supplements in alphabetical order.
oh my God, I know. And I'm a woman who likes to be perceived as perfect and like I have my shit together all the time.
All right.
And I think we just need to feel like it's okay to fuck up because we know at the core what we're looking for is connection here. And I feel like that's what we're giving permission for right now.
Yeah. And the human condition is messy. And this topic is messy. And I think I'm grateful for, it sounds like you're grateful for, I'm grateful for having a partner where I can be messy, make mistakes, not do it perfectly, and then to stay connected so I can learn. Like I feel like I'm still learning, 18 years of focused personal work, and every day I'm still learning something, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel similarly and super grateful to be having these conversations with you as well.
Likewise.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's a good wrap up. All right. So thank you very much for all the people who came on the line. It's always easier having a studio audience, just knowing that we're not just talking to ourselves, though that'd be fun too. And we'll be back next Monday at 6 p.m. PST. I'm going to post this hopefully by Friday in post-production, get this up on the old YouTube so you can tell all your friends about the most amazing conversation you've ever heard in your entire life between Arielle, a woman, and Rob, a man.
Boom.
There you go. All right. Okay. Take care, guys. Love you. Bye.
Love you too. Bye.